Cell membrane and cell transport. We talked about the cell membrane. We talked about how it's semi-permeable, meaning some things can go through. We know that in the cell membrane where the phospholipid bilayer is, that this is the phospholipid bilayer. These are proteins embedded to help. This helps transport sugars. This is a sugar molecule and active transport across the membrane. And then you have other proteins as well. This is a phospholipid bilayer, the heads, the tails. The heads like the water, the tails like the fat. Remember hydrophilic and hydrophobic. So we know that the cell structure is to support the cell, give it shape, and to protect it, and to communicate. The fluid mosaic model is talking about how it's diverse, like it is here, where it has the proteins and the phospholipid bilayer, the heads, the tails, and fats and carbohydrates. These are things we've already talked about. So passive and active transport. We talked about passive transport requiring no energy, where active transport requires energy. Oops. We talked about passive transport being diffusion, where it passes from high concentration to low. We talked about osmosis, where it's diffusion from high concentration to low, but it is transporting water. Diffusion is all other molecules. When we're talking about the concentration gradient, we're talking about moving from high to low, which is diffusion. We have a high concentration of molecules on this side of the membrane. This gray line is the membrane, and it disperses across the membrane until both sides are equal. The same amount of the molecules are on the left as are on the right, which equals equilibrium. Same is true for this picture here. On the left you have more molecules and more molecules on the right of green molecules and purple molecules, so they're going to blend together to make the same amount on both sides of each, causing equilibrium. And that is again going from high concentration to low. So no energy is required to make this happen. It just happens because there's more on one side than the other. Passive transport still. Process of diffusion. It's the same thing. You're going to see this is one. This is a dye put in the water molecule surrounding. The dye is going to disperse equally around the water. That is diffusion, which didn't require any energy. Passive, again, transport is diffusion. It's osmosis of moving water across the membrane from high to low. You can look at these videos to help you out, which is a great option. Facilitated diffusion is also still passive, doesn't require energy, but it's going to go through a membrane protein that helps some of these molecules to get across the membrane. It still does not require any energy, it just happens from high to low. Tonicity is talking about solutions or solutes that compare two different solutions. So from the outside environment, from the inside environment, the words are hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic. If you look here, we're going to see a solution. This is the solution with a greater solution, solute, which is a mixture of things, in concentration. So there is a greater solution concentration on the inside of the cell compared to the outside of the cell. So in this case, the water is going to flow out of the cell until there is equal amounts of water on both sides. This is when we're talking about cells themselves. What will happen to a cell? If the water leaves the cell, then the cell will shrivel up and become hypertonic. It'll shrivel up into, because the water is moving out to the lower concentration. Even though it's moving out to the lower concentration, it's going to cause the cell to shrivel up and shrink. Same being the case in a plant cell. You'll see it's all withered up here. In hypotonic, we see that there is more solution on the outside than the inside, so the water is going to rush into the cell, causing this cell to swell up into like a big O. That's why I always say hypotonic. The cell is affected by causing it to become a big round ball. When there's more solution on the outside that rushes into the cell, that's hypotonic. Here's an example of a hypotonic cell. It gets so much water in it that it bursts like a balloon. You can see it here as well, and it's starting to bend the edges of the cell, the plant cell membrane and cell wall, to make it kind of look like a bursting at the seams, wearing something that's too small, right? Okay, here we're talking about hypotonic again. We're going to have more solution on, did I go backwards? I think I went backwards. Okay, isotonic is talking about perfect on both sides, that it's equally balanced, it's equilibrium. So here's equal solutes on the inside, equal solutes on the outside, that's equilibrium. Here's a perfect cell, perfectly has the same amount of water on the outside as on the inside, same for the plant cell, so it looks perfect. Here we have examples of these items. We're going to look at hypotonic, hypertonic, and isotonic. If we look at the cell here, it's big round ball, so it's hypotonic. If we look at this one here, it's hypertonic. And if we look here, this is going to be isotonic. If we look at the plant cells, we can see that these are kind of bursting at the seams. We're going to see that it's hypotonic. If we look here, we can see that it's perfectly celled off. So I would call this this would be isotonic. And then this one looks like it's lost its ability to keep its shape, like it's bursting. So this would be your hypertonic. Kind of the cell walls are bending in just a hair, not much. But you can see everything's getting smaller on the inside. Nucleus that was showing up here is now shrinking, or this is the vacuole. That's the nucleus. Nucleus kind of seems the same, but the vacuole is shriveling up, where here it's nice and balanced, right? Okay. Active transport is requiring energy. In active transport, you're going to see the molecules moving against the gradient, which means they're going to go from low to high, like swimming upstream backwards, right? These molecules are too big to move through the membrane by themselves, so they have to go through carrier proteins. These proteins are going to carry those large molecules across the membrane, which will require energy. All right, here's a carrier protein, so it's going to lock it into place with the proper shape and move it across the membrane. Here is energy. ATP is adenosine triphosphate, which this is energy required in order to push that across the membrane. So if you see ATP, you know it's causing it to have energy required. Okay, so change in shape results that causes a carrier to release a potassium ion. Here's the potassium ion. The ion is because it has a charge here. This plus is causing it to be charged because it lost an electron and has more protons inside the cell. So it's releasing it inside the cell, and it takes up 3 sodium ions once again. So it's going to pump out sodium and pump in potassium. That's why it's called a potassium-sodium pump. Here are the other active transports. We have exocytosis and endocytosis. Both of these are going to require energy. Exo means to get rid of, cytosis means cell. So the cell is going to get rid of something. So for example, it'll get rid of waste that's not required. It'll package things in vesicles to move it to another cell or outside the cell. And endocytosis is called eating. So it engulfs it by surrounding it and bringing it into the cell. And then in exocytosis, it surrounds it and pitches it out of the cell. So exo means to exit, endo means to bring in. And these both require energy because they're active transport. Here's an example of looking at exocytosis. So it's going to surround it, bring it to the surface of the cell, and then release it, taking it outside the cell. Here is endocytosis. It's going to take and wrap around it, and then engulf it and bring it inside the cell. And this is also called pinocytosis. You can watch a video at the bottom as well. Okay, we've already talked about active and passive transport. We know active transport is endoexocytosis, and active transport requires energy. We also know that passive transport is osmosis and diffusion and facilitated diffusion. We know that sodium-potassium pumps are active transport as well, requiring energy. Passive does not require energy. All right, we will stop there. That is all the information you need for the test. So we'll review, and if you need more information, we'll continue to pass that on. But right now, this is what you need to know. All these things you need to study and know for the test. So take notes, make flashcards, be prepared.